all countries, and I have all of the things and learn more about you. And I pray that learn so many more things that and protect and
All right, starting John 13, and we're going to start pick up in verse 28. Last week we looked at Jesus' trial for the religious leaders, and tonight we're going to pick up as his trials continue. So in John chapter 18, verse 28, I'm going to start reading there and most of the rest of the chapter. I'm going to read it real quickly, and then we'll dig into it. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. And they themselves did not enter the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might pass over. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death," to fulfill the words of Jesus by which he spoke, signifying by what kind of he was about to die. Therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to them. But as it is, my kingdom is not this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him." So tonight, we're going to look at that interaction with Pilate, and we're going to do a couple different things tonight. So we're going to be jumping a couple different places. So just stay with me here, because first thing I'm going to do is give you some historical context and some perspective on what's going on with these trials and what's going on historically. So we have a better understanding of what some of these things are referring to and how they interact. Second thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to walk through the passage and look at some of the truths and some of the events going on here and just get a better understanding based on some of that historical and some of that context that we set there. And then last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at Pilate's final question to Jesus there. Pilate asks him the question. Jesus doesn't answer it, but Pilate asks a very poignant question. And so we're going to look at that because it's hard to come to this passage and not address how we should, as Christians, how should we answer that. So, starting off looking at some context and some perspective on where we are in history and what these trials mean. So, the four Gospels present an overview and a picture of Jesus' life. They all pick different events from Jesus' life. And so to put them, to get a better understanding of Jesus' life, you put all those Gospels together and you can kind of tell a timeline is laid out. The accounts are very different. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more similar. John is very different. A whole bunch, most of the book of John is completely different. It contains things that are not included in the other Gospels. But keep this in mind. All of them are 100% accurate. All four Gospels are 100% inspired, like the entire Bible. And so every one of them is true. And so it's our job to take them and understand them. Not to, I don't get this part, I'm just going to set it aside. No, God gave it to you, God gave it to me so that we could understand, so that we could know, so that we could grow in our walk. And so that's what we're going to do tonight, is take some of these differing passages, and I want to try to give you a bigger picture. Trials that Jesus went through are a little bit confusing because have you ever read through? You read through one gospel, it's like, wait, is he's talking to Herod? Now he's talking to the chief priest, but he's talking to Pilate. Who? What is going on with this trial? Have you noticed? It's like, was Jesus on trial with everyone in Jerusalem? I mean, did everyone have their own hearing? What's going on here? Silent, I mean, what is that? So as you read through and as you put the Gospels together, I've got this really cool book. If you want to understand the Gospels better, really cool book. It's called Harmony of the Gospels. It's nothing new, but essentially what it is it lists out in chronological order. Matthew says this about this event. Mark says this. Luke doesn't say anything, but John says this one. And so it just kind of puts them all side by side. And it goes through. And it's really good to give you an entire perspective. It's just called the Harmony of the Gospel. And it's no one's interpretation or no commentary on it. It's just laying them out side by side by side by side. 4 different columns. See, in some places, John's the only one saying anything. Some places, Mark is the only one that has it. Some places, all 4 Gospels express it. But when you put the Gospels together, we see that there were 2 trials. And each trial had 3 different phases. So if you read through this and it's like, how long did these trials last? How many trials were there? 6. Okay, there were 6 different trials Jesus went through this night. But backing up and giving just a little bit of historical context. So during the days of Jesus, the Roman Empire ruled the world. They were the world power. They controlled the entire Mediterranean Sea, pretty much all of known Europe.
They'd even gone as far as Britannia.
Okay, I didn't realize how far they'd gone there. But so all the that whole region, most of the known world, apart from the Far East and stuff. So they had a stronghold on that. Not only that, they were a powerhouse militarily. And so they were the world's superpower.
A quarter of the world's population was of the Roman Empire.
Right. And so so they controlled a disproportionate amount of the world. So that included their reign and their empire included the region of the Middle East where Jesus lived and ministered and is now on trial. So the Roman government became more and more oppressive to the Jewish people over time. There was kind of a okay relationship at one point, but it got more and more oppressive. And they were actually the taxes and tributes that they demanded from people were putting merchants out of business. They were farmers and landowners were losing the land that had been handed down generation after generation, had been in their families for forever, and they were losing that land, having to give it over to the Roman government because they couldn't pay. People were living in the cities, in the poor sections of cities, begging, stealing, selling themselves, selling their children as slaves to try to just survive. So that's the kind of oppressive hand that Rome had over the Jewish people. So there's this disdain for Rome, but at the same time a fear for Rome, because Rome demands total allegiance. Rome demands that there be no subversion, there be no trying to undermine what we're doing. And so they live in total fear, but total hatred of Rome. So as Jesus goes through his ministry, you may remember sometimes people were saying, are you the one? Are you the one who will deliver us? They weren't talking about, are you the one who will deliver us from our sins? Are you the one who will deliver us from Rome? Are you the new king that's going to come into place and get rid of the Roman government? They were looking for a political conqueror, a military general who would come in and clean house, make things right. There were some people, some of the Jews kind of joined some political circles that were fighting and opposing everything the Romans did. They were trying to get people to stop paying their taxes to Rome. They were trying to get people to subvert Rome any way they could. Those people were called, in that day, they were called Zealots. You may remember one of Jesus' disciples, a guy named Simon, the Zealot. He came probably from that political movement of political activism against Rome. And it was a very prominent thing in that day, but a very dangerous thing as well, because about 20, 30 years before Jesus was born, there was a guy who started this movement and encouraging hundreds and thousands of people, don't pay your taxes, boycott Rome, okay? Essentially, he died a brutal death, crucifixion, very public way, because of his opposition to Rome. So that's kind of the Jews' perspective on the Roman government. From the Romans' perspective, the Jews they kind of tolerated them, but they were the problem child of the empire, essentially. They were the problem because they were stuck in these traditions that were ancient. They were not up with the newest way of thinking. They had their one way of doing things. They were not going to change. They weren't open to other new ideas. They weren't open to new traditions or new things. They had to do things their way. The Jews kept going back to their holy book, which is the Old Testament that we know, and they would insist on doing everything as prescribed in that book that was so old. And the Romans just saw them as a problem. In addition to that, there were the revolts and the uprisings, like I mentioned. And actually, it was recorded in history that the Jewish region of the world, which is a very small little pocket, especially given the Roman Empire.
Israel is smaller than El Salvador.
Yeah, Israel's tiny. And so the Jewish pocket, though, actually caused more problems for the Roman Empire than any other region in their entire empire because of the rebellion and because of the pushing back of the Jewish people. So there's a tension in their relationship, and so that gives us some context for the trials and the execution of Jesus, and so it puts it in perspective of where we're at. So all these trials can seem a little confusing at first, so I want to break it down so we've got a better understanding. As I mentioned earlier, there were two sets of trials, 3 trials each. There was a Jewish set of trials and a Roman set of trials, because the Romans allowed the Jews to have their own governance and their own oversight to a point. We'll let you go this far. We'll let you keep your traditions to a point, but there are certain things you can't. There's certain things we're not going to allow. There's certain things we'll respect your traditions until we don't feel like it. And so the Jewish leaders are the ones who are opposed. Roman leaders, they don't care about Jesus at all. Not on their radar. He doesn't matter to them whatsoever. So we've got these 2 sets of trials that take place, one with the Jewish religious trials and the other with the Roman civil trials. So each of these sets of trials had 3 different phases. So I'm going to go through just what they were real quickly, and so to kind of give you an oversight, and they happened in order: 3 Jewish trials, then 3 Roman trials. Okay, and so that's kind of how it plays out. And so the order that we're going to go in is what happened in this early morning hours. So the first trial we looked at last week was the trial before Annas, who is the high priest, and that took place in the court of Annas, and actually the former high priest, but he was still the high priest. They still referred to him as high priest. He's still the power behind the Jewish religious movement. He's the force that makes things happen. He's the one people turn to when they're like, we don't know what to do. He's the go-to because he's the one. And so that's what we looked at last week. And it was interesting because he shows up in the court of Annas, and Annas, his question to him is, tell me what you've been teaching. He had no charges. He had no accusation. There was nothing against Jesus. He's trying to get Jesus to incriminate himself. And so that was the first trial that Jesus had. So that was for the former high priest. His son-in-law was the reigning high priest, the one who has the mantle of authority at that time, who's kind of still taking orders from his father-in-law, Annas. And his name is Caiaphas. So the second trial is with Caiaphas at Caiaphas' house, right there. And all this is within. Okay, y'all drove down our driveway. Probably from our house to the end of our driveway is about the area that all these events are taking place in. So just walking to different points out in the cow fields out here and down to the end of the road. Kind of that context. It's all less than a quarter mile apart, all these things. So the second trial is before Caiaphas. John doesn't really talk about that other than they led him to Caiaphas. But at Caiaphas' house, there was another trial. And again, they didn't have any charges against Jesus, and they started asking people who were there, what charges do you know? What charges do you bring? And they found some false witnesses and brought them to testify against Jesus. So that was the second trial, and it was at that trial that the religious leaders, this Jewish religious leaders, they made the decision: Jesus must die. We sentenced him to death. There's a problem with that. We're going to see several illegal aspects of the trials tonight too. I'm going to go through those real quick. But this happened. These two trials happened between 2 and 6 a.m. Okay? It's not even daylight yet. And that's when these trials are going on. Does that sound like a little bit of misuse of justice, of the justice system, of the legal system? So the third trial is before the Sanhedrin. And the Bible tells us this happened after daylight because that was the legal time to hold the trial during daylight hours. The Sanhedrin was the governing body of the religious leaders. There were 71 people named to that group called the Sanhedrin, and that group formally sentenced. They received the recommendation from those who were at Caiaphas, and they formally sentenced Jesus to death. So yes, this is the decision of the Jewish religious leadership, and yes, we concur with that decision. So that's the end of the Jewish trials. So here we have this decision and the determination that Jesus must be put to death. That's his sentence. It's a problem when you impose a sentence that you have no ability to carry out. Remember I said the Romans let the Jews have leeway up to a certain point? One of the things they did not have the freedom to do, did not have the right to do, is put anyone to death. So now they've imposed this sentence on Jesus, but they have no way to carry it out without just completely going against the Roman government and defying the Roman government. They couldn't do that in this case because it was such a public, it was so much in the public eye. If you read on in the book of Acts, they actually did that in Acts chapter 7 with Stephen. They said, let's go ahead and kill him. Because that one was not in the public eye. So Roman government's like, whatever, this is not a big deal.
They were worried that he would become a martyr.
They were worried on this one that there would be, the Roman government on this one was keeping an eye on it because they had already been involved. Judas brought the entire Roman delegation, army delegation, to Jesus' arrest. So they were already plugged in, and they were already connected. So they're keeping an eye on it. So now, these Jewish leaders who have sentenced Jesus to death but have no way to carry it out legally, they take him to Pontius Pilate. And that's where we're going to be tonight. That's what we just read about. Pilate was the governor of Judea, so that's the area where Jerusalem is. And his palace is located along the Mediterranean Sea. But during Passover, because there are so many hundreds of thousands of Jews that come to Jerusalem, they bring they bring in the Roman troops, they bring in the Roman government, because they want to prevent. Remember, this is the problem child, and now we've gathered them all in one place. They're going to revolt if we don't keep a close eye on them, if we don't keep our thumb on them. And so Pilate has come over from Caesarea, which is along the Mediterranean Sea, and he has a house that he stays at there, and an offices that he works out of in that area. So they bring him before Pilate, and that's what we read about tonight. Pilate finds out, it comes up in conversation, that Jesus was actually originally from Nazareth, which is in another region. He's the governor of Judea. There's another region in Israel called Galilee. Galilee. And he says, "Oh, you're from Galilee? Cool. You're it. I don't have to deal with this anymore. This guy is from your region." He sends him to Herod Antipas. And in the passage, he's typically called Herod. And sends him to Herod because Herod is the governor of Galilee, where Jesus originates from. He's also in town because this is where all the Roman officials need to be during Passover to keep an eye on things. And he was really glad to be part of this trial. He's the one that said, "Jesus, I'm so glad you're here. I've been bored recently. Can you do a miracle for me? Because I want to see it. That would be really cool. Do a miracle for me because I want to see it." Before this event, Pilate and Herod hated each other. This event brought a common bond between them, and they actually became friends over this event. Kind of a morbid way to become friends, killing the Son of God. So this is at this trial is one of the times that Jesus remained silent.
Actually, I'm wondering, why would, throughout the Bible, Jesus consistently performed miracles to prove to people that he was indeed the Son of God? Why wouldn't he do the same right here?
He's not Herod. There's a difference between someone who's truly seeking and someone who wants a spectacle. And Herod is definitely does not have a. He's not. Man, if I would believe in you if only. But Jesus did that to demonstrate who he was. And so that was the rationale. So after the trial with Herod, Herod's done with him, and he sends him back to Pilate for the final trial. Pilate found Jesus not guilty, and this is what we'll look at next week. Found him not guilty, and he wanted to release him, but he was afraid there would be a revolt because the religious leaders, this whole group of 70 plus the other people they had drawn in, were rousing up the crowds in hatred and against Jesus. And so Pilate's kind of afraid of where this is going. And if you've ever been in one of those situations where there's a frenzied crowd, you don't know which way it's going to go. I told a story a few weeks ago about being in Chicago when the Bears, downtown Chicago, when the Bears won the Super Bowl. And it was cool for a minute, and then it wasn't. It was like This went from celebration to flipping cars over and lighting things on fire in about that quick. That's what they're afraid of. I wasn't flipping cars for like but that's what they're afraid is going to happen here. And that's what Pilate fears. And so he's in the dilemma. Do I give in to their wishes to crucify an innocent man? Or do I stand up for what I believe is and believe is right? So tonight, we read the account of that first trial, this first trial before Pilate here at the Praetorium. And that's just kind of the governing offices there. And so let's kind of go through there. Let's take a look back with me, if you will. Jump back to verse 28. It says, they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the Praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter the Praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat Passover. So did y'all catch who's leading him? It's the Jewish leaders who had just had Jesus on trial. They bring him to Pilate, but they won't go into his house and into where he does work because he's a Gentile, it's unclean, and they're about to celebrate the Passover. And so if they are in that context, they will become unclean, ceremonially unclean, and they won't be able to partake in the Passover. And that's like the worst thing of all. That's like missing Christmas for the Jew. Okay, so they will not be able to take part in that. And but look at the hypocrisy here. What was their concern? We don't want to be unclean. But what are they there to do? Condemn an innocent man. Remember those times Jesus said, your heart is far from me. You do all the things on the outside to make yourself appear holy, but the inside is full of deceit. The inside is corrupt. Jesus pointed the finger at them many times, and now they're giving a perfect example of this, aren't they? Of what it means to be a total hypocrite. I want to appear holy. I want to appear righteous while I am lying about someone, while I'm condemning someone to death for no crime that was committed. They were all about checking a box spiritually. Yep, I did. I wore my priestly garments today. Check. I did this activity today. Check. I looked holy today. Check. They were all about looking spiritual and looking holy, not being holy or being righteous. So this whole thing was a mock of the legal system. Look down verse 29. John continues on. He said, therefore Pilate went out to them. He realized they were not going to come in. If he wants to move this thing along, he's going to have to do it. So he went out to them. What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, if this man were not an evildoer, we would have not delivered him. We would not have delivered him to you. Well, that's a convincing argument, right? Can you imagine bringing someone to court? The judge says, what are the charges? I wouldn't have even bothered bringing him if he wasn't really bad. If he wasn't really bad, why would I even be here? Why would I be wasting my time? Clearly, this is an evil person. Oh, yeah, good point. That's essentially their argument. So Pilate, I love his response here. Pilate says, take him yourselves then, and judge him according to your law. The Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone. So are they looking for a trial? Are they looking for justice?
They want a scapegoat.
Well, they want a scapegoat. More than that, they want a death sentence. They want to get rid of Jesus. They want to shut Jesus down. So in this same context, we read in Luke chapter 23 that they realize we're going to have to kind of spin this so that the Romans, because we're not making a real good argument here, we're going to have to spin this so that the Romans will buy into what we're saying. And so they said, they trumped up these charges and said, oh, you know what? He's trying to lead a revolt. He's trying to get people to rebel against the Roman government. He's trying to get people to not pay their taxes. Because they're thinking that will get Pilate. That will get us on the same page. So Pilate asks him, are you a king trying to take over this region like they're saying? And look at verse 36. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Therefore, verse 37, Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world. Testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to them, what is truth? And when he had said this, went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt. So what's Pilate's question to him? Initial question to him? So are you really a king? They're accusing you of being a king, the king of the Jews. They're making this accusation, and Jesus said, I'm not a king like you're thinking. Because an earthly king would not allow himself to have been captured so easily. He would not have just turned himself in. An earthly king would not rebuke one of his followers for standing up and defending him like Jesus did Peter. An earthly king would not heal the enemy when, oh man, one of the enemy got hurt in the battle. Let me heal him quickly. Let me put his ear back on for him. Jesus is saying, I'm not a threat to what you're doing. I'm not an earthly king as they're trying to paint it out. I have no army. I'm not striving for power and position. My desire was essentially saying is to conquer the hearts of men and God's word. I want God's truth to be known. I want people to know the truth and to live by the truth. He's essentially saying, I'm not here on a political mission. I'm here to change the lives of men. And Pilate's response to Jesus' desire to get truth known is, what is truth? And it's not said in such a way that he was really making an inquiry. More of a cynical. Can anyone even know what that is? What is truth? What are you talking about? Acting like you've got the corner on the market on truth. People have been seeking that for ages. What is truth? Whatever. There's a book by Josh McDowell called Right. And in that, it tackles this question of what is truth, and it presents a whole lot of different ways. And so, here's the definition it gives: truth is that which is true for all people, for all time, for all places. That which is true for all people, for all time, all places. So, what does that mean? Truth is absolute. Right is right, wrong is wrong. There's no my truth and your truth. Kind of hear some of that in the world. Truth is, yeah, exactly. Truth is absolute, though. There is truth. Truth is also objective. It's not determined by people, by cultures, by popular vote. Here's the other thing. Truth is constant, unchanged. Truth is universal. Truth is noble. And truth is noble because we have God's word. The real question Pilate's expressing here, and our world is expressing in a whole lot of different ways. Who has the right? Who has the right to decide what's true and what's not? Would you know how to answer that question? How can we know the difference between truth and empty? As Christians, we know that God's word is our source of truth. But I hope to give you a little deeper understanding of what that means. Because the world says it may or may not be wrong to murder. For some context, the world says it's fine to murder, depending on the person's age, depending on their importance to society. If someone's not born yet, we don't care. Go ahead and murder them. Someone is not of the right mindset, political correctness. But as Christians, we know God says, do not murder. So we're looking at this one example. But that command is not arbitrarily put into the Bible. God didn't say, let me make up some rules. Let me just make up a list of rules so that I can be exerting my godhood over people. I have to have authority over them, so they need rules. God didn't randomly come up with a list of rules. It goes a lot deeper than that because the rules, the guidelines, the commands, the instructions in Scripture, they point to a moral principle.
Those are very important foundations for society. Society cannot survive without them. They don't just help us.
Exactly. And those are the foundation, the moral foundation and the moral truths that those commandments point to something deeper. And it's a moral principle. And that principle gives us the why. So as you read God's word, you see, thou shalt not murder, right? Don't do it. One of the commandments. But it also gives us the why, because you're made God. Because you're precious to God. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. God values life. That's the principle behind it. That's the why. So the command, do not murder, becomes way bigger than just, okay, I won't beat someone till their heart stops beating and they cease to have brain activity. Okay? That's the technical description of murdering someone, right? When their heart stops beating and there's no more brain activity. Okay? If you want to be technical about it, I could make someone a vegetable, but because that's not murder. I could, till there's nothing really functional about their life. That would be the technical obedience to an instruction, a command. But is that God's moral principle? No. Principle's life is valuable. So not only am I not going to murder, I'm not going to harm anyone. I'm not going to harm anyone emotionally with my words, with my attitude, by ignoring it. So the principle takes one command and makes it so much bigger. But that principle is not the end either. It goes one step further. Truth isn't truth because it's instructed by God. And truth isn't truth just because it makes sense. Truth is truth because it reflects the person of God. It reflects God's character. It reflects God's nature. It's who God is. So when God says, thou shalt not murder, it's because he is the giver of life. It reflects all that he is and is. So ultimately, God's laws, God's commands, God's instructions reveal the character of God. They show us a moral principle, but it goes deeper than that. So let me ask you a question again. Why is truth truth? Because it reflects the character and nature of God. It's who God is. truth points to God's character.
If you know,
Okay, let me go on so we don't run. So let's look back at Jesus' trial again. Okay, so Pilate asked that question. And it's in the cynical tone because I'm sure if it was in a genuine, Jesus, what? I'm really trying to understand this. In that moment, would Jesus have remained silent? Not at all. But Jesus didn't answer. Because likely it was a cynical question. So looking back at Jesus' trial, I mentioned to you there were several illegal aspects to Jesus' trial. I just want to throw these out there real quickly. Historians point to multiple aspects of Jesus' trial that should have resulted in a mistrial, by our terminology, should have canceled any verdict, canceled any decision. Let's go through them real quick. It was, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, the trial was held at night, illegal. 2 of the trials were held between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Jesus was presumed guilty before the trials even began. And the Roman law had a similar expectation that you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. Third thing, the court hired false witnesses. These were court-appointed witnesses that were known to be false. Testify against Jesus. Would any legitimate court of law knowingly welcome false witnesses? That's not an aspect of our justice system or any fair justice system. Jesus was mistreated. He was beaten while he was bound with ropes. The authorities didn't allow Jesus to have a defense. They actually had attorneys and people to represent people who were in trial. Jesus was not permitted that aspect. That's part of the Miranda rights. You have the right to attorney. Right? So our justice system is somewhat related to the Romans' perspective on law. There's a lot of things that are very similar, and they violated. So Jesus was not allowed representation. The Jewish law required, if a death sentence was imposed, a full night must pass before it's carried out. That's very different from our justice system, isn't it? If a death sentence is imposed, there will be 4 or 5 presidents that come and go before your death sentence is carried out. But here, you have to let at least a day go by to make sure that everyone has the right perspective, that nothing is missing. This was not an attempted justice, attempt to kill Jesus. So, they couldn't bring legitimate charges against him. There were no charges. In all 6 of these trials, there were no legitimate charges because he was innocent. They had no witnesses, no legitimate witnesses to testify against any wrong he had done because he was innocent. They had to resort to breaking the law to get these trials rammed through, to get these convictions that they had because he was innocent. Hebrews 4:15 says, he was without sin. Hebrews 7:26 says, Jesus was holy, innocent, undefiled. 1 Peter 2:22 says, Jesus, who committed no sin. Virtually everyone associated, almost everyone associated with the trials knew he was innocent. That's an important feature. We'll see more examples of that next passage. How much is the highlight of Jesus' innocence? But that's important. He's innocent. Why? Sacrifice. If he wasn't innocent, his sacrifice would have been for him only. Not it. He's innocent. Required that so was his sacrifice. So an innocent man had to be wrongly convicted, and that's what we read about in the Gospels. That's what we read about in these trials. Look at 2 Corinthians 5:21. He made him who knew no sin perfect, innocent. Sin on our behalf, so that the perfect, innocent, holy Jesus became sin. Why? So that you and I righteousness of God. Jesus had to be perfect every step of his trial. Illustrates since testimony of most everyone associated with trials is that you see the final words that we read tonight. Pilate comes out. Believers says, he did nothing. Here, I find nothing. Got two things for you. As you read God's word, I'm challenge you to look beyond the instructions. Look beyond the commandments. Look beyond the statements that say, do this. The Bible isn't a book of doing, it's a book of knowing God. So look beyond the surface things. See the character, see the nature of God. As you're reading God's word, ask yourself, what do I learn about God's nature? What do I learn about who God is as I read this passage? The second thing is just something. Consider the contrast of Jesus. No one else in the room knows. No one else in the room knows your level of guilt. Don't be trying to figure it out for everybody else. Figure it out for yourself. Look at my guilt. Look at my sin. Look at the innocence. Look at his perfection. That's sin. His holiness. Passage, first and foremost, 2 Corinthians 5:1 says, make sin so that you might righteousness. This innocent on full display. So that's the Romans don't take. Jews don't take Jesus' life. Jesus said, I paid. Lord, I thank you. This blatant affectionate holiness in the midst of injustice. It's the brave, sinful, cruel people. That really shows that this